Good morning and welcome to Daybreak. I'm your host, Bakhtiar Sanov, and let's see the top stories. U.S. President Donald Trump says Iran in talks with the United States as Tehran denies negotiations. Denmark faces political deadlock as Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen wins the most votes, but no bloc secures a governing majority. And the United Nations General Assembly adopts a Ghana-backed resolution calling transatlantic slavery a crime against humanity and urging reparations. Conflicting signals are emerging between Washington and Tehran, with Donald Trump saying Iran wants a deal but is afraid to acknowledge it, while Tehran rejects any suggestion of talks. The divide shows deep uncertainty over whether diplomacy is even underway.
U.S. President Donald Trump says Iran is engaged in talks with Washington, but is reluctant to admit it publicly, while Tehran insists no negotiations are underway. Speaking at a fundraising event, Trump said Iranian leaders are avoiding public acknowledgement due to fears of internal backlash.
When I tell you we're winning so big, nobody's ever seen anything like we're doing in the Middle East with Iran. And they are negotiating, by the way, and they want to make a deal so badly, but they're afraid to say it because they figure they'll be killed by their own people. They're also afraid they'll be killed by us.
Tehran has rejected that claim. Foreign Minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, said there has been no negotiation or dialogue with Washington.
No negotiations have taken place so far. I state firmly that there has been no negotiation or dialogue with the American side. However, in recent days, the American side has begun sending various messages through different intermediaries, messages being conveyed through our friendly countries, and us responding by stating our positions or issuing the necessary warnings is not called negotiation or dialogue. It is simply an exchange of messages through our friends.
He said what has been described as a 15-point plan consists of proposals conveyed through third parties and now under review by Iran's senior leadership, adding there is currently no intention to negotiate. According to sources familiar with the proposals, they include removing Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium, halting enrichment, curbing its ballistic missile program, and cutting off support for regional allied groups. The White House has not confirmed the full details, but says contacts with Iran are ongoing and described them as productive. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said the United States is prepared to escalate military action if needed, adding President Donald Trump does not bluff and is ready to unleash hell if Iran miscalculates. Meanwhile, Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf said intelligence suggests enemies are planning to occupy an Iranian island with support from a regional country, warning Iran would respond with continuous attacks on vital infrastructure if such a move takes place. The conflict has entered its fourth week, with continued air and missile strikes and disruption to energy flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Several countries, including Pakistan, Turkey and Egypt, are attempting to mediate, but no breakthrough has been announced.
For more on this, our correspondent Ubi Shibander joins us from Washington, D.C. with the latest developments and what they could mean for the region.
It may be the last chance to bring the ongoing conflict with Iran to an end. The Trump administration has delivered a 15-point peace plan to Tehran via Pakistani intermediaries. During a press briefing on Wednesday, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt said that President Trump was giving the remaining elements of the Iranian government an opportunity to cooperate with Washington. Leavitt said that President Trump wants a peace deal, but if Iran fails to understand, in her words, that they have been militarily defeated, then President Trump will ensure that Iran is hit harder than they have ever been hit before. The U.S. and Israel have temporarily removed 2 senior Iranian officials from their list of officials to eliminate as the U.S. and Israel explore possible peace talks, according to U.S. officials. Iranian Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi have been removed from the target list for up to 5 days as President Trump opens the door to high-level negotiations that could potentially end the war. The White House believes that Iran's defense industrial base has been effectively dismantled, according to the latest briefings. On Wednesday, Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of the U.S. Central Command, said that U.S. forces are ahead of schedule in achieving their military objectives for eliminating Iran's ability to project power in a meaningful way in the region. U.S. forces have struck more than 10,000 military targets in Iran. Together with Israel, thousands of more targets have been struck, according to U.S. military officials. Iran's ability to launch drones and missile strikes has been reduced by nearly 90%, as well as 2/3 of Iran's missile and drone and naval production facilities have been either damaged or destroyed, according to the U.S. military. I'm Ube Shibander, A News, Washington.
Now let's go to the stories making the front pages this morning. First, our A News website. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says his country is not seeking war, but wants a permanent end to conflict. And South Korea's president is urging nationwide energy conservation as rising fuel costs put increasing pressure on the country's power system. Global diplomacy is in focus near Paris, where G7 foreign ministers are meeting against a backdrop of wars, economic uncertainty, and shifting U.S. policy. And a stark warning from the UAE's energy chief, who says any disruption in the Strait of Hormuz would have global economic consequences. And we again continue with A News. Iran is trying any potential ceasefire to developments in Lebanon, underlining its continued support for Hezbollah and widening the scope of the conflict. And Tehran is issuing fresh warnings of retaliation amid claims that unmanned actors may be preparing to seize an Iranian island. North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un has warmly welcomed Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko in his first visit to the country. The two allies of Russia are set to sign a friendship and cooperation treaty as both countries continue to face Western sanctions and criticism over human rights. State media showed lavish ceremonies, including an artillery salute, goose-stepping soldiers, and visits to North Korea's revered historical sites. And in a historic verdict out of Los Angeles, a jury has found social media giants Meta and YouTube liable for designing addictive platforms that harmed a young user. The case, the first of its kind to go to trial, centered on the experience of a woman identified as KGM, who testified that she became addicted to YouTube at 6 and Instagram at 9, developing depression, self-harm behaviors, and mental health disorders as a result. The jury awarded KGM $6 million in damages, assigning 70% of the payment to Meta and the remainder to YouTube. Lawyers for KGM compared the social media companies' tactics to those of Big Tobacco in the 1990s, alleging that features like infinite scrolling and video top play were intentionally engineering to keep users hooked. That's your roundup for this morning. After the break, we'll be taking a deeper look at the rest of the global stories with more analysis, content, and updates from around the world.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues, shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
And welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News. Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November. Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kiev, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories. Israeli strikes are expanding across southern Lebanon, with multiple towns hit and emergency teams responding to widespread damage. At least 20 people have been killed and dozens wounded since Wednesday, according to Lebanese authorities, with civil defense crews tackling fires in affected areas. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz says forces aim to secure areas up to the Litani River. Hezbollah says it will fight any move to expand Israeli presence in the south, calling it an existential threat. Denmark's election has delivered a fragmented result, with Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen still leading the largest party, but now facing difficult coalition talks after no bloc secured a majority. Our correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where Denmark's election delivers a fragmented result and sets the stage for difficult coalition talks with major geopolitical implications. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen remains leader of the largest party, but her Social Democrats suffered their worst result in more than a century, winning just 38 seats and about 22% of the vote. Neither the left-wing Red Bloc nor the right-wing opposition secured a majority in the 179-seat parliament, leaving Denmark politically deadlocked. That puts former Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen and his centrist moderates in a kingmaker role, with just 14 seats but potentially decisive influence over who forms the next government. Rasmussen said, "We're in the middle. Come down and play with us. We are ready." While Frederiksen gets the first chance to try to build a coalition, negotiations are expected to be long and complex, with parties ruling out key alliances and pushing competing visions for Denmark's future. But what's at stake goes beyond domestic politics. The election reflects voter frustration over inflation, tax reforms, and welfare, and marks a sharp reversal for Frederiksen, who called the snap election hoping to capitalize on strong support after her handling of U.S. President Trump, only to see voters shift focus back to domestic issues. There is also growing geopolitical pressure, particularly around Greenland, whose pro-independence Nallerock party won a seat in the Danish parliament for the very first time. That signals rising tensions within the Danish kingdom and growing calls for a looser relationship with Copenhagen. With global powers increasingly focused on the Arctic and Greenland's strategic importance rising, even one single seat could carry outsized influence in a tightly balanced parliament. The outcome now matters far beyond who becomes prime minister. It will determine Denmark's economic direction, the stability of its political system, and potentially the future shape of the kingdom itself, as questions over Greenland's path toward independence move closer to the center of power. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
G7 foreign ministers are meeting in France with wars in Ukraine and Iran and concerns over U.S. foreign policy dominating the agenda. The two-day talks near Paris bring together foreign ministers from Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and the United States, along with the European Union. Talks are focused on the Middle East conflict, including the Strait of Hormuz, and stalled efforts to end Russia's war in Ukraine, with European officials warning against any deal that could disadvantage Kiev.
To welcome my G7 ministerial colleagues in good company.
A Russian drone strike hit the historic St. Andrew's Church in Lviv, injuring 32 people, while Ukraine ramps up its drone and missile defenses in response to Moscow's growing attacks. Meanwhile, the U.S. has briefed Russia on its recent talks with Kiev, highlighting ongoing diplomatic efforts amid the conflict.
A Russian attack on the historic St. Andrew's Church in Lviv, Ukraine, aimed to destroy European culture, officials say. The 17th century church, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, was hit on Monday by a Russian drone. Online footage shows the drone crashing into an old building next to the church. The attack left 32 people injured. After the strike, residents and tourists prayed inside the church while workers cleared the rubble. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Wednesday that Russia is attempting to carry out up to 1,000 drone attacks per day. In response, Kyiv is accelerating the production of its own drones and interceptors. Zelensky emphasized that his country will respond to every Russian strike, warning that Moscow would otherwise see no reason to halt the war, even as international pressure eases.
The bad news is that the Russians are moving toward their goal of using 1,000 drones a day. The good news, if you can call it that, is that their plans haven't yet caught up with reality, but that is undoubtedly their goal. That's why we're aiming to produce over 1,000 drones and interceptors a day. And as of today, we know we're capable of doing so. With the budget in place and the deficit reduced, we've come close to the capacity of 2,000 interceptor drones per day. They, the US, haven't stopped our supplies. I am very grateful to President Trump, to his team, and to everyone. They haven't stopped our supplies. But the supply of Patriot missiles isn't as large as we need. Are we afraid it will stop? Yes, that's what I'm talking about. I won't speculate on how long we'll be able to hold out after that.
The United States has briefed Russia on its latest talks with Ukraine. Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov told Interfax on Wednesday.
Everybody knows that the trilateral talks on Ukraine are on hold for obvious reasons, and you have already mentioned it. What I would like to say is that the US colleagues have provided us with a very detailed briefing on the progress of the bilateral talks they held in Florida last Saturday with the Ukrainian delegation.
Ushakov said, last Saturday negotiations were held in Florida with the Ukrainian delegation.
The United States has made security guarantees for Ukraine peace deal conditional on ceding Donbas to Russia, with Zelensky warning that such a move would endanger the security of both Ukraine and Europe.
Americans are ready to finalize these security guarantees at a high level once Ukraine is ready to withdraw from Donbas. In my view, the Russian side is shaping the atmosphere in its dialogue with the Americans around this very idea that Ukraine should withdraw from Donbas. The United States will then provide the security guarantees Ukraine is seeking, and Russians will certainly end this war. More or less, this is the triangle we find ourselves in. You understand that withdrawing from Donbas is wrong, immoral, and so on. But withdrawing from Donbas today also means weakening Ukraine's defensive lines. That's it. Russia always keeps one step in reserve. Take nuclear weapons, for example, something they constantly talk about threatening the entire world. Whenever there is a deadlock, at some point they send a message, what if? So tell me, why wouldn't they start the war again on new terms and tell the whole world, look, we can use the weapons we mentioned? We have no protection against that.
Hungary is facing scrutiny in Brussels over reports that sensitive EU discussions may have been shared with Moscow. Budapest denies the claims, calling them fake. The controversy comes just weeks before Hungary's elections. William Denslow reports from Brussels.
In response to this reporting, first picked up by the Washington Post, the European Commission says that these accusations that Peter Szijjártó, Hungary's foreign minister, faces are greatly concerning. The Commission has sought clarification from Budapest on these allegations that Szijjártó would share details of European Council discussions with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov. Now, we've heard from Budapest and from Peter Szijjártó describing it as fake news. He also says that it is perfectly normal for him to have conversations with fellow foreign ministers, be them Russia's foreign minister or from any other country as it may see fit. We have had a myriad of responses from European officials, including from Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk, saying that he is not surprised by these allegations. He even insinuates that this is why he limits what he says in the European Council meetings here in Brussels, because of these very concerns about Budapest creating an open line, an ear for the Kremlin in Moscow to get a on-the-ground account of discussions here amongst EU member states. This is also taking on a dimension ahead of Hungary's elections on April 12th. We've heard from Viktor Orban, the country's prime minister's major challenger, Peter Magyar. He says that if indeed these reports are true, he said that that would amount to treason. So certainly these incidents playing out here in Brussels across Europe and could have potential ramifications as Hungarians get set to head to the polls next month. William Denslow for A News in Brussels.
The United Nations has taken a historic step by recognizing transatlantic slavery as the gravest crime against humanity, with Ghana leading the push for accountability and reparations despite opposition from the United States and Europe.
The United Nations General Assembly has adopted a resolution proposed by Ghana. The resolution recognizes transatlantic slavery as the gravest crime against humanity and calls for reparations. Despite opposition from the US and European countries, the resolution was approved. In the vote, 123 countries supported the resolution. 3, including the US and Israel, voted against it, and 52 abstained. The resolution is not legally binding but carries significant political weight. Ghana has said that the effects of slavery, which saw at least 12.5 million Africans forcibly taken between the 15th and 19th centuries, are still felt today, contributing to racial inequalities. Foreign Minister Samuel Ablakwa stated that the resolution aims to ensure accountability for historical injustices. The resolution marks a new step in Africa's efforts to hold former colonial powers accountable. It follows last year's initiative by the African Union to create a unified position on reparations among its 55 member states. It calls on member states to engage in dialogue on reparations, including issuing formal apologies, returning stolen artifacts, providing financial compensation, and preventing repetition of such injustices. The resolution has faced criticism from the US and the European Union, who warned it could create a hierarchy of crimes against humanity. US Representative Dan Negrea described it as an attempt to use historical wrongs to redistribute modern resources. African and Caribbean nations are seeking to establish a special UN reparations tribunal, and Ghana believes the resolution could pave the way for such a framework.
We continue with our top story for discussion. Tensions between the United States and Iran are intensifying, with continued strikes, escalating rhetoric, and new diplomatic efforts emerging behind the scenes. While Washington warns Tehran of heavier consequences, Iran rejects surrender and signals continued resistance. At the same time, potential talks reportedly involving nuclear, missile and broader security issues may take place as soon as confirmed by Rafael Grossi of the International Atomic Energy Agency. The conflict is already reshaping regional dynamics, with key sites like Karg Island under heightened alert and diplomatic channels quietly reopening through intermediaries. To unpack the geopolitical, military and diplomatic implications of this fast-moving crisis, we're joined by James Dorsey, political analyst who joins us from Singapore. Mr. Dorsey, welcome and good morning.
Good morning. Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dorsey, Iran says the United States has shifted tone. Does this suggest a strategic recalibration, and how realistic are the proposed talks reportedly planned in Pakistan?
I think what we're seeing is motion without movement, or a dialogue of the deaf. Essentially, U.S. and Iranian positions have not altered. You still see the U.S. President Donald Trump adopting the attitude that he adopted in the weeks prior to the war, and he has adopted during the war, which is the belief that his military superiority, together with that of Israel, will force Iran on its knees, and therefore will force Iran to surrender. That's not what the Iranian position is. On the contrary, they believe that their asymmetric approach to warfare has given them the upper hand, particularly in the Strait of Hormuz.
Mr. Dorsey, how significant is the military importance of Karg Island in this conflict?
The importance of Karg Island is really economic rather than military. In terms of the Strait of Hormuz, it's 350 to 400 nautical miles north of the strait. So in that sense, it would have very little impact. What's more important is that it is Iran's main oil export terminal, and therefore control of Kharg Island would increase the U.S. economic stranglehold on Iran, although Iran has other export options. In addition to which, the Iranians have made clear that they would welcome U.S. boots on the ground, given that they believe that that would give them the advantage of fighting on their homeland. In addition to which, the Iranian military is a military that is experienced in ground battles. At least its commanders have the experience of the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, and of course they have the experience in Syria.
So Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi framed the U.S. messaging as a sign of failure. How should we interpret that?
That is the Iranian position. They feel that they basically shape the battlefield, and the battlefield is as much a form of diplomacy as are whatever indirect talks are going on. And so I think what you're hearing from Araghchi is what the overall Iranian position is.
So has the damage to Iran's infrastructure changed Tehran's negotiating position?
We see no indication of that. There's no doubt that Iran has been militarily weakened. The United States and Israel have military superiority. The question is, and we don't know the answer to that, how much damage has been done, how much destruction has been achieved. Fact of the matter is that as long as the Iranians can fire missiles and drones, they remain a player.
Mr. Dossi, thank you very much for talking to A News. We truly appreciate your time and analysis. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. The Los Angeles court has ruled against major tech companies. On Wednesday, 25th of March, a jury found Google and Meta must pay $3 million in a social media addiction case. The decision could affect thousands of similar lawsuits. Parents of affected children waited outside the courthouse and cheered when they heard the verdict. Lenin Tours and Heat Initiative said the ruling is the start of big tech being held accountable. The case involves a 20-year-old woman who became addicted to YouTube and Instagram at a young age. The jury decided both companies were negligent in designing the applications and did not warn users about the risks. The White House has installed a statue of Christopher Columbus on its grounds in a move that reflects a broader effort by the Donald Trump administration to revisit how U.S. history and national symbols are presented. The statue has been placed near the Eisenhower Executive Office building on the White House grounds, with President Donald Trump thanking Italian-American groups for the donation. Similar statues were removed across the U.S. during the 2020 racial justice protests following Google Floyd's killing, sparking debate over their historical legacy. Critics say they overlook the impact on indigenous peoples, while supporters see them as part of national history. Over to a quick break now. When I return, we'll take a look at the regional headlines, where an analyst will be joining me to dig further into some of the key stories. Stay with me.
and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala.
One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are recording Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Turkey says natural gas deliveries from Iran are continuing despite reports of a disruption following strikes on Iran's largest gas field. The comments come amid wider regional tensions and ongoing uncertainty in the Strait of Hormuz. Adam Morrow has more in Istanbul.
Turkish Energy Minister Alparslan Bayraktar has denied reports that natural gas flows from Iran to Turkey had been halted, saying deliveries were continuing and supply remained secure. Speaking to reporters after a Tuesday cabinet meeting, Bayraktar said Iranian gas flows to Turkey were ongoing, adding that the country's storage facilities were currently about 71% full. Earlier the same day, Bloomberg had cited unnamed sources as saying that Iranian gas exports to Turkey had been halted following Israeli-U.S. strikes on Iran's South Pars gas field. Iran is one of Turkey's key gas suppliers, typically accounting for between 10 and 15% of annual imports. The two countries are linked via the Tabriz-Ankara pipeline, which has historically provided an important share of Turkey's wintertime gas supply, although Turkey also imports large volumes of liquefied natural gas from both Russia and Azerbaijan. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, meanwhile, has said the ongoing closure of the Strait of Hormuz has caused significant disruptions to the global economy. Speaking to reporters in Ankara, he said the international system was undergoing what he described as fundamental change, with the emergence of what he called new alliances. Erdogan added that Turkey was navigating the regional conflict cautiously and was determined to avoid being drawn into what he called a ring of fire. Since the regional conflict began last month, Iran has effectively restricted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, saying that what it describes as non-hostile vessels may transit the strait if they coordinate with Iranian authorities. According to Turkish officials, at least one Turkish-owned ship has been permitted to pass through the strait, while a number of others are still awaiting Tehran's permission to transit the strategic waterway. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Kazakhstan says it's ready to deepen energy cooperation with the United States by expanding export routes across the Caspian Sea and boosting investment. Kazakhstan's energy minister made the remarks during talks with U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright on the sidelines of CERAWeek in Houston. The two spoke on energy security, alternative corridors, and the Caspian region's role in global supply chains. U.S. investment in Kazakhstan's energy sector has now exceeded $60 billion with major projects involving ExxonMobil and Chevron. Central Asia's energy systems are under growing strain. A new report by the Eurasian Development Bank warns that heavy reliance on single energy sources, ranging from hydropower in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to gas in Uzbekistan, is leaving the region exposed to climate shocks and supply disruptions. With glacier melt accelerating and extreme weather events becoming more frequent, the challenge of energy security is becoming increasingly urgent. To unpack these risks and explore possible solutions, we're joined by Richard Spooner, member of the advisory board at the Caspian Policy Center, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Mr. Spooner, good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Very nice to be with you.
So, Mr. Spooner, how serious are the vulnerabilities highlighted in this latest report?
I think they're serious. I think when you only have one source, it affects not only your energy security, but your economic security, and also it affects regional geopolitical security. As you mentioned, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan depend on hydropower. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan depend on hydrocarbon-generated electricity. There's ways that the report by the Eurasian Development Bank is saying problems can be mitigated. And I think one of the key issues is that Central Asia still lacks a developed market for the sale of electricity among the 5 Central Asian countries. That would be an important thing for these countries to work on. We talk a lot, in the recent past about increased Central Asian connectivity. And that's something that would be important for energy. Obviously, it's going to require a lot of cooperation to work out water supply issues among the 5 countries of Central Asia as well, relations between the upstream and the downstream countries. So I think that the Eurasian Development Bank is correct to point out the seriousness of this issue.
Mr. Spooner, how is climate change reshaping energy security across the region?
Central Asia, of course, yes, is very susceptible to climate change, and that does create a lot of issues. When there's a shortage of water, that can affect the situation across the region, and of course, the whole world is facing challenges due to global warming. But I'm glad to see that lately Central Asian countries have become better connected. I'm glad to see the relations between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, who are the two main engines of development and opportunity in Central Asia, developing good neighborly relations. And I believe that they can cooperate to lead the way in resolving the problems that Central Asia faces.
Mr. Spooner, how exposed are gas-dependent systems, particularly in Uzbekistan, to extreme weather shocks?
That, of course, is a problem. That is a problem. I believe that their relations with their neighbors, again, are going to be important. I think the main thrust of the EDB report was that the issues that Central Asia faces are issues that can be resolved if they develop markets to sell, to deliver energy to each other. That's something that's going to be very important going forward. In addition to modernizing their electricity grids, they need to develop the kind of relationship where if there's a surplus of electricity available in one country, that can be used to improve the situation in a country that's having a shortage. For instance, in the countries that are more dependent on hydropower, they need to interact positively with the countries that use hydrocarbon power.
So in your view, is regional energy cooperation improving, or are countries still acting largely independently?
I think it needs to improve more. As we all see, general connectivity in Central Asia has improved over the last several years. But, water is a commodity that countries consider very precious, and for good reason. There are ways that the Central Asian countries can do business with each other and support each other. So I believe that the Eurasian Development Bank is doing a good thing by highlighting these issues because, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is not only about energy security, it's about overall economic security, geopolitical stability. These are issues that the Central Asian countries are going to have to face along with the other challenges that they face.
Mr. Spooner, what role can external partners, including the EU or China, play in strengthening resilience?
I would say one positive role that external actors can play is that the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure in Central Asia needs modernization. According to estimates in the EDB report, 70 to 80% of the hydrocarbon-based energy generating power is out of date, so that needs to be modernized. And that's something that would be very risky to put off. That's going to require financing. So that's a place where the European Union and China could both play a very positive role.
What do you think? Could water scarcity become a source of regional tension in the future?
I'm afraid that, yes, it could. It's going to require some very serious discussions among the 5 Central Asian countries because, as you know, you have your upstream countries and your downstream countries. Yes. And, for instance, where I spend most of my time working in Kazakhstan, the country is dependent on flows of water that come from Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan and from China as well. That requires serious cooperation. And I would say that there has been a lack of the needed level of cooperation. It's something that's been talked about a lot for the last several years. But, and I'm sure, we're not aware of all the details that are being discussed when the leaders of the C5 countries get together. But I do believe that the spirit of cooperation is much better than it was 20 years ago, much better indeed.
Richard Spooner, thank you for joining. We truly appreciate your time and insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Tensions are rising between Georgia's government and its Western partners after a court sentenced opposition leader Alen Khoshtaria to prison, a move that has triggered strong international criticism. Nini Nikolaishvili has more.
A court in Tbilisi has sentenced opposition politician Alen Khoshtaria to 1 year and 6 months in prison, a decision that has sparked both domestic and international backlash. Khoshtaria, founder of the DROA party, was convicted for damaging property after writing Russian Dream on an election banner of Tbilisi mayor Kakha Kaladze. She was arrested on September 15, 2025, 1 day after the incident. The verdict comes despite a recent resolution adopted by the European Parliament on March 12th, which called for Khoshtaria's immediate and unconditional release. The resolution, backed by multiple political groups, described her case as politically motivated and expressed broader concern about democratic backsliding in Georgia. It also urged authorities to repeal restrictive laws, investigate alleged abuse of detainees, and ensure freedom of expression. The resolution further raised alarms about the influence of foreign powers and the continued detention of former President Mikhail Saakashvili. Despite these calls, Georgian officials have dismissed the criticism. Parliament Speaker Shalva Papuashvili defended the judicial process, stating that it is shameful to portray offenders as victims and accusing European lawmakers of political bias. At the same time, Georgian opposition parties and civil society organizations have strongly condemned the ruling, accusing the Georgian Dream of undermining democracy and violating fundamental human rights. International reactions have continued to intensify. The Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe has demanded Khoshtaria's release, while other European figures have described the case as an attack on democratic principles. Khoshtaria, who has been in detention since September 15, 2025, maintains that her actions were an expression of political protest. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Afghanistan has released an American citizen who had been detained for more than a year, describing the move as a humanitarian gesture during the Eid al-Fitr holiday. The release came following appeals by the America's family and international coordination. Our correspondent Tamim Bahiz has the details from Kabul.
The Afghan Ministry of Foreign Affairs says American national Dennis Coyle has been released on humanitarian grounds after the country's Supreme Court ruled that the time he had already served was sufficient. Officials say the decision came after a request from his family, particularly his mother, seeking clemency ahead of Eid al-Fitr. And he was later handed over to his family and a U.S. delegation in Kabul. Afghan Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi also met in Kabul with former U.S. Special Representative Zalmay Khalilzad, UAE Ambassador Saif al-Katbi, and a representative of the detainees' family. During the meeting, Muttaqi said foreign nationals are detained only for violations of Afghan laws and released after judicial procedures are completed, adding that Afghanistan is ready to improve consular cooperation. Authorities thanked the UAE for helping facilitate the release and also acknowledged Qatar's role in supporting communication between officials and the detainees' family. U.S. officials confirmed that the release came without any deal or payment, while welcoming the move, but noting that Washington is still seeking the return of other detained Americans. Tamim Bahiz in Kabul, A News.
An immersive exhibition of Cleopatra has opened in London using holograms, virtual reality, and interactive technology to present the life of ancient Egypt's last pharaoh. Cleopatra, the experience features 9 galleries tracing key moments from her life. Organizers say the format is designed to offer a clearer understanding of Cleopatra's world through visual and digital elements. The exhibition also includes more than 20 original artifacts alongside large-scale reconstructions and AI-based displays.
I think it's more interesting than the Of course. The Pompeii one, to be fair. The dark tunnel. Yeah. They're going to be...
Thank you for watching Daybreak with me, Bakhtiar Hassanov, and have a good day.